Hi, everybody. This is Gary Housley with USAmericanMadeGuitars.com. Wow, what a great guest we have on the show tonight. I've got Greg Renoff, author of Van Halen Rising, and it's been described by people like Eric Broadbent from EVH Gear TV as the holy grail of Van Halen, I guess you'd say, information? How would you describe that there, Mr. Renoff?
It's that's very nice of him to say that. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's the holy grail of the Van Halen origin story. I'll give myself a little pat on the back, but that's very big praise from Eric. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, Eric is a good buddy of mine, and I've caught your interview on his channel, and I just want to give a shout out to Eric. Hey, man, nice to be inspired by you, brother. And Greg, this is an inspiration to me too. I'm a big Van Halen fan. I'm one of those guys that I made sure I'm a completist in a way. I collected all the video, I mean not video, but audio cassettes, every album from Van Halen on cassette tape.
Mm.
If you can imagine that. Most people collect vinyl or CDs, DVDs, that kind of thing. And I say, hey, I'm going to go for the cassette tapes. And I got, the original press stuff, and it's just amazing to have that as part of my life, to grow up with that. And I want to talk about how you grew up and what got you started listening to Van Halen. What got you going with that?
Yeah, that's of course the key question there. How do you ever get to write a book like this on Van Halen? I grew up. I was born in 1969, so I was about 8 or 9, I guess 10 years old, and I had an uncle come live with us, my mom's brother, and he was a guy who was born in 1955. So when he was 20, he was sort of coming up with Hendrix and Cream and Clapton and Mountain and all these groups, and he was living in our house, and I was a kid, and he would put on these records, and I'd listen to them. And I always think that was sort of what originally got me attracted to rock guitar playing. It didn't really blossom until later, till the early to mid 83, 84, when I started really hearing bands on the radio like Van Halen and Quiet Riot. For me, the Jump single was like my first real connection with Van Halen. I say it was all the time. I know I heard the Pretty Woman song on the radio, but it may have the same impact. I heard the guitar solo in Jump particularly really got me as a person who would eventually start playing guitar and things like that. And then went to see Van Halen the 1984 tour, and I was sort of off to the races. Like you, had all the cassettes and just became this big fan. And that fandom for me never really waned. There were periods of time where I was depressed, obviously, about the state of Van Halen, or elated about things that were happening with Van Halen. But the years went on, and then I got the opportunity later on to start doing a little research. I am a historian by training. I went to school for that, and ended up having this chance to dig in a little bit to Van Halen's past. And for me, it just became this sort of this Moby Dick quest to get the white whale. I really wanted to get the Van Halen story down, how they formed and how they broke out of Los Angeles. And for me, that was and is the great untold rock story. It still remains, I think, one of the great tales of perseverance and hard years together, working as a team to build a band and build a brand. I mean, talk about EVH Gear, build a brand, the Van Halen brand that has lasted for all these decades.
Right, and it has. It's stuck on me, and it's the same exact story with me as with you. We must be very close in age. I was 13, I think, in 83, 84. Yeah. Right, and that's when I first heard Van Halen, and I was actually becoming more aware of music, and was just blown away by Jump, and from that point on, it was over for me, man. It's been Eddie Van Halen ever since. And I'm always interested in that band. I've always looked up information and photographs and watched as many videos as I can. And I thought I knew a lot, but I really didn't know anything. I mean, compared to the knowledge that you've unmasked in your book. It's got a lot of rave reviews. Eric Broadbent just went on and on and on. I mean, he was like a kid in a candy store holding your book up. And a lot of mentions of stories and stuff were made that I was just like, wow, I didn't know that. I mean, that's some really interesting stuff. So I want to kind of go back in time like a time capsule, because here I have a guy who's a history professor, right? Right.
Well,
Talking
retired, so to speak. But
reti-
yeah,
right.
I was for 20 years. I was a history professor. Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, because you even wrote a book about some traveling circus in Georgia from 18 like 20 or 30 to 1930, something like. I mean, wow. What? I mean, I didn't know there was a traveling circus that went that far back.
Well, it was sort of interestingly enough, as long as you bring that up, yeah, that book, The Big Ten, I wrote, which came out about 10 years ago, was sort of like a prelude to writing Van Halen Rising, if you think about it, because that was actually one of my real research interests was about popular entertainment. And you think about um, a big show coming to town from city to city, like a circus might, the Three Ring Circus, an arena rock band, it's really not that different in a lot of ways. It was a similar type of deal. People would come to these shows and, be super excited they were coming.
Yeah, when I think about the circus book that you wrote, and I think about Van Halen, there's not too much of a difference, is there?
It really isn't. It's actually, that became more and more clear as more I worked on the Van Halen book. I actually found this topic is not that different. The big crowds and we don't want to get too far afield of that, but yes, yeah. So yeah, the research, yeah, and the stories. That was for me to be able to unearth all of this, what was largely unknown and definitely was unknown in one package, like my book has bits of how Van Halen came together and the things those guys did, from playing wet T-shirt contests to playing backyard parties to playing on the Sunset Strip to the whole Gene Simmons episode to how they got signed by Warner Brothers, how Roth paired up with those guys. And so those were all stories that I don't think had been fleshed out in any great detail before. And so for me, I wanted to, as a historian, to be able to put that whole thing together so we can move from the day that Eddie met Dave, basically, all the way up through they're playing Anaheim Stadium with Black Sabbath in 1978, 79, and that type of stuff.
Yeah, you're talking about, and I said, well, I wanted to go back in time, and you're talking about back when Dave met Eddie, and I familiarized myself with some of that, and it's so fascinating that you took such great detail into getting all this information out because no one has bothered to do that.
I think the thing is, yeah, for me, as I said, it sort of became an obsession for me to kind of put the story together. I had grown up reading. Well, here you'll like this: Guitar for the Practicing Musician, Guitar World,
Oh yeah.
Circuits, Hit Parader, Cream. I mean, I had read these magazines. I'd read that. I'd buy the little compilation books like Guitar World presents Eddie Van Halen with all his interviews together and read them. And you'd read these little snippets, and you'd read a Roth interview in Rolling Stone magazine where he would talk about, yeah, we used to play these backyard parties, or Eddie saying, yeah, Gene Simmons tried to get us a record deal. And so for me, what I wanted to do as a person who I thought could put this story together as a historian was get all these things lined up. And yeah, the whole Eddie had met Dave thing, for me, that was that was like the scripture for me, in writing that, because that was, how did this thing form, this band that had such a huge impact on you and millions of other kids, that was just so powerful when I saw them on the '84 tour, and anyone who knows those records, how explosive that combination of these two guys together was, to sort of get to sort of how did they get from these two odd couple guys get together in this band. They don't have matching personalities, not at all. And to be able to make the music they did and just to persevere for so many years together. Roth joins in 73. They don't get a record deal to 77, and they don't get a double platinum record to 78. For the fans, I thought in some ways everyone should know that story, because it's not an overnight success. I mean, some bands get signed, they get very, very quick success. But to have all those years of playing dive bars and making no money and just driving around in these cars that were completely beaten down, Eddie and Dave and the rest of the guys in the band just really struggling to keep the band going year in, year out without having any sort of guaranteed sense of there's going to be a success. I mean, that was a very inspirational story too. And that was the other thing that really drove me, was I said, this is a bigger story than just a band making music. It's about how do people who have a common goal, even if they don't necessarily get along, like sort of like on a sports team, keep their focus on the bigger goal and keep working despite all the adversity and all the internal conflict.
Yeah, yeah, that's what people like me want to read about. I mean, we can't get enough of Van Halen information, Van Halen music, Van Halen merchandise. I mean, you name it. If it, we want to get a hold of it. So I'm very very happy to speak with somebody that's taken the time to put this stuff together for people like me and all the other fans out there, because I mean, we eat it up.
Well, the other thing is worth mentioning for people to eat up. If they'll pick up a copy of my book and check it out, the other thing I really wanted to do with the book, and I did do, was that I spent a lot of time as a kid staring at Circus Magazine and all these different magazines, and you sort of got to see a lot of the same pictures eventually because of, I mean, all great photographers. I won't mention their names. I mean, these guys are all obviously the king rock photographers. But one of the things I did with the book is I got all previously unpublished pictures before. So there was a couple of women actually who shot Van Halen. Some of the pictures are from a garage in Pasadena when those guys are like 20 years old, 1974, jamming in a garage. There are pictures of them playing at Glendale High School in California on basically like a lunch hour free concert. These pictures have not been published before. So for people who are really into sort of seeing Eddie Van Halen's guitars at different stages, seeing how the band changed, their look, they were definitely more glammy with platform shoes early on and stuff like that. That's all in the book as well, because that was something for me that was really important, was just not to put in the same pictures that we've all seen before, basically the same visuals. I wanted it to be an experience where people were able to picture a Van Halen that maybe they hadn't seen before as well, open their eyes to what Van Halen looked like, not just what Van Halen did.
Oh yeah, that's really really important. I think it gives you that visual stimulation, and I love looking at pictures of Van Halen. They're fascinating to look at, to watch. Their look was really, it's incredible. Really, I mean, it's flashy, bright, and Eddie and his $1 million smile, and Roth and his gyrations. He looked like a stripper about ready to take his clothes off, and I mean, these guys were. They living the dream, man. I mean, and they were extremely entertaining, and it was like a fishing lure to a bass fish, man.
The Well, I mean, that's the thing too about working on the book too. People would ask me, "How did you stick with writing this book for so long, Van Halen Rising?" Because it took me over the course of 5 years, and obviously I don't mean I sat down every day and typed every single day, but over the course of 5 years and had to put it down, pick it back up, maybe a month later, keep working on it. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was like you say that lure. I had to finish the book. I mean, I just had to get it out because I just for me, I wanted to have it together. For me as an author, I thought to myself, I hope people like this book, but for me, I want this because I want to be able to open this book and be able to understand how did we get from point A to point B to point C and so on and so forth, and actually see it all change and really imagine how the band changed musically as well, how they really changed from as we all know, Eddie and Alex are much more into Black Sabbath and Cream, but by the time we get to 1978 and the first Van Halen record, they don't really sound like Black Sabbath, and they don't really sound like Cream on the record at all.
Right, and speaking of their early albums, they came out in 1978 with Van Halen, and a lot of people refer to it as Van Halen 1. And but right before 1978, you just don't know much about, people in general just don't know about what these guys went through. A few times while you're talking here, I've posted up a picture, and I'm sure you've seen it, of Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth standing in front of McDonald's, and Eddie's got a cheeseburger in his hand, and Roth's got a bag of McDonald's something, and I mean, these guys weren't, they weren't eating out at the ritziest places like millionaires. I mean, they weren't there.
I know that exact picture you're talking about. Yeah, that was taken in Detroit in March 1978, and you're exactly right. So that is the first couple of weeks of the Van Halen tour, and they were the third billed band. Okay, they were out with Ronnie Montrose as the middle act and Journey as the headliner, and they were playing for about 35 minutes at most. That was their initial sets, and they would go on at 7:30 in the evening, and they would play their 30 minutes, and that was the deal. And so, I think the quote I have in the book from Eddie, their backstage spread when their first beginnings of their tour was something like 2 towels and like a bottle of Coke or something, like a 2 liter bottle of Coke or something. I mean, I'm serious. It's like something like that. It was something ridiculous, because they were nobody on the national rock scene. They were literally starting from zero. I mean, they had a Warner Brothers record deal, obviously, but nobody knew Van Halen in Detroit. Nobody knew Van Halen in Chicago when they first arrived. There was no Van Halen brand, again, to use that term. People might have heard a song on the radio, but there was no sense this was the quote unquote mighty Van Halen that we all came to know. And so again, that persistence of those guys sticking with it and getting out there and touring that whole year and breaking that record, it's really amazing.
It is, and I love the album cover. I mean, I thought it was pretty cutting edge actually. The photography and it just grabs your attention. Like I said, it's like everything they did was like a fishing lure. It hooked you. It was and Eddie's playing, which is just hard to even describe. How I feel about that. It's just. I mean, what words can I come up with other than you know out of this world, amazing, fantastic, incredible, all the pro words. I mean, I just
Yeah,
that's the only way I
yeah,
could do. I mean, it's hard to even put your finger on it, because what he did with his fingers and how the tone and every just the whole package, the look and everything is just wow. And those guys those guys struggled like hell, man. I mean, do you got any stories that you could tell that you know of about their struggles?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I would take it all the way back with the Van Halen family. I mean, I think the thing we need to understand about the Van Halen family was that they were very blue collar. There was no privilege in the Van Halen household, financial privilege. I'm not saying they were dirt poor. They weren't dirt poor, but they would have been what we would call working class. Their dad comes to the United States, doesn't speak the language, so they immigrate to the United States from Holland in 1962. And I go through all this in the book. The story is that the Van Halens had a couple of relatives who were living in California, and what I the market for jazz music in Europe, I guess, was starting to decline. Jan Van Halen was a jazz musician, and he was not doing as well as he had, and so there was a big German American. They're Dutch, but there's a big German American community in Southern California, and there were some places to play apparently. And so the family said, "Yeah, come. There's work. You can come and you could work and play music and come to America." So they come to America. They're so tight with money that they have to basically come and use their life savings to come to the United States. They come with the piano and basically nothing less. They actually live. The Van Halen family lives in a apartment like basically like a converted, big house that was converted into apartments. And my understanding is that Eddie has said in an interview was that there was like a one bathroom for multiple families to share, which is something today that we would be like, what? You'd like live at an apartment house with multiple, basically one family wouldn't have their own bathroom, but no. And so, their dad though had no car, had to walk to work at a hospital, and he
Wow.
actually worked as a maintenance person in a hospital. Eventually, he was gigging as a musician as well, but to put food on the table and really pay the bills, he was also working. And so there's that whole, for me, that's one of the more inspirational things about Van Halen. Whenever I see Eddie Van Halen with his motorcycles or his cars and all these things, I think to myself, you know what? Their parents worked their asses off, and those guys worked their asses off, and he deserves every bit of that money. And everyone who works for their money deserves it. But I think there's something we both agree there's something sweet about seeing somebody who really did go from rags to riches, metaphorically speaking. Wasn't just somebody who had a very privileged life and remains privileged, but somebody who really understands what it's like to kind of scrap like that family did, and to have that sort of great success after hard work as immigrants. Let's face it, as people who came to the United States, didn't speak English. To me, that's the American dream, and that's the other really great, cool thing about Van Halen Rising and about the Van Halen family, because I really wanted to give those guys their due for that. They really deserve it, because they are, to me, that's an incredibly inspirational story.
It is incredibly inspirational. That's why I'm not going to ask a whole bunch of stories about what stuff that's in the book, but I definitely did want to get your take on their struggles. Because one of the most interesting things about Eddie Van Halen to me is that he did scrap for everything. Literally, his guitar was built out of scraps. I mean, that did you get anything into that? The act,
Yes,
kind of the
yeah.
gear thing.
Oh, yeah. So here's the thing I would tell your audience. I should have said this earlier on. So I grew up, as I always said, I never really graduated beyond the intermediate stage as a guitar player. I was one of these guys who sat down with the tab books and tried, and I can muddle my way through some songs and stuff like that, but I never could sort of graduate to really having a great command of the instrument. But that was helpful to me because I was able to, in the book, lay out Eddie Van Halen's gear choices over the years, from where he's playing the gold top Les Paul, talking about where he was playing his original Marshall, but also how he used to play through a Fender Basement a lot. A lot of people don't know is that Eddie used to bring a Marshall cab and his Fender Basement, a white Fender Basement top, and play through that because it wasn't as loud as his Marshall. Talking about the creation of the Frankie, the creation of Eddie's style in particular. I wanted to really, really talk about how Eddie went from being, in effect, what was a Clapton clone. I mean, that's what he was. He was a guy who was an incredibly gifted player at like 16 years old, but he was basically known for being able to note for note copy cream licks. And again, this is in the neighborhood in Pasadena among the other kids, to a guy who by 1977 has put together the two-handed tapping, the tremolo bar, the variac, the whole Eddie Van Halen pedal board, the whole legato approach to playing the instrument, which we all have come and love so much. I mean, that's one of the things I do. I really do spend a lot of time in the book tracing that out as a guitar player. So, I may not be able to play Eruption, but I did write a lot about how all of that sort of came together for Eddie. And I think I would appeal to guitar players if they want to understand the development of the Eddie Van Halen guitar style in a very, very long plane back to the late 60s up through 1978, 79.
Awesome, awesome. That is so great, and I can't thank you enough for getting all that details because I'm going to pour through this like everybody else that's will hear this. I'm sure they're going to want to pour through this stuff. I also want to touch on. I mean, that's a little bit about Eddie's guitar and that kind of stuff, but I want to touch on some studio things. Their first album, who produced that?
Ted Templeman.
Ted Templeton. Okay, I just don't. I'm not an expert on Van Halen as far as all this backstory stuff, and that's kind of why I've got to get this book. So but Ted Templeton must have been a genius or something. I don't know, but he worked with these guys who are definitely geniuses, but it must have all came together. In the studio with this guy, and you touch on Ted Templeton and his relationship and how they worked in the studio together. Do you touch on that in your book as well?
Yeah, so I had the great benefit of being able to interview extensively Ted, and then the engineer Don Landy, who was the guy who worked the controls for the album when they made it at Sunset Sound. And so I got Ted's perspective on how he tried to put the record together and how he saw Van Halen as a unit. And so one of the things that Ted really made clear to me when I interviewed him was that when he first saw Van Halen, he got a tip from Van Halen's first manager, that he wasn't managing Van Halen at the time, but a guy named Marshall Burrell, who in 1977 called up Ted Templeman and said, "You should come check out this band. It's playing at this club. I think you'd like it." And once Ted saw Van Halen, he said that for him, it was like all Eddie. He thought the band was good. He thought, had his own opinions about the drummer, the bass player, the vocalist. But for him, when he said he saw Eddie Van Halen, he said, "This is one of the best musicians I've ever seen perform before." He said, "This guy is unbelievable." And so Ted really wanted to make the Van Halen record showcase Eddie's guitar. And so when you listen to how he produced it and what it sounds like, Ted didn't make it sound like a lot of rock records at the time, where it's sort of the guitar sort of mixed in with the other instruments. To me, if you listen to Eruption or you listen to I'm the One, the guitar is just so dominant in the mix. I mean, Ross vocals too, but if you listen to it really closely, it's pretty clear that Ted was saying, this guy is the thing I want to really make sure everyone really latches onto and understands, because I think this guy is a game-changing musician, and he was right. And of course, the other thing that Ted did that I think is worth remarking about is that Ted really got how to work with Dave and what Dave did well and what Dave didn't do well. If you listen on YouTube to some of the bootlegs that Dave has before they're signed, and we all know that Dave is not a Pavarotti, but Ted, who was a vocalist himself, by the way. Ted was a guy who was in a band called Harper's Bazaar. They were like a association, a Fifth Dimension. They were like a light rock band, like a pop group. But Ted was a singer himself and is a singer. And so Ted really said, "You know what, Dave, here's what you should do," and basically helped coach Dave up and help give Dave on record that Dave Roth vocal style, which we all love. And so, yeah, I think Ted was the right producer. He just really got it. Now, he had also done the Montrose record, and I think that's the other thing that sort of was a great benefit for Ted, is that Ted did the first record with Sammy Hagar and Ronnie Montrose. It came out in 1973, and it's got Rock Candy and Rock the Nation and Bad Motor Scooter, all these great songs. And if you listen to that record, in some ways, that record was the blueprint for Van Halen in a lot of ways. The loud guitars, the great rock songs, the strong vocalist, the great rhythm section, and Ted kind of I think had that as a the benefit is he had done this once with Montrose and kind of understood how to make a really great rock record sound amazing.
Yeah, and it does sound amazing. How many albums did Ted, produce with these guys?
Ted did their first every record with Roth. Ted did so he did 6 of them with Roth, and then later in 1991, Ted was brought in to co-produce for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge with Andy Johns, and so that was the last one that Ted did with them. So Ted worked with them on 7 other albums. So he's got a long history with those guys.
Wow, yeah, and the first 6 albums are absolutely my favorite, and I love 5150, of course. It's not Roth, but I the first 6 albums are just unbelievable. I mean, that's what changed the world. I mean, 78, you had Van Halen come out, Van Halen 2 in 79. I mean, these guys back-to-back albums, in those 2 years. Then Women and Children First in 1980. 3 albums back-to-back. Fair Warning, 1981. Diver Down, 1982. I mean, one, two, three, what was that? 5 albums, 5 years back to back. I mean, those guys were monsters, man. They were cranking out the hits.
That's the thing too. I think one of the things I tried to do in the book as well is really talk about the songwriting that came together for Van Halen 1. Doesn't touch on the other records, but I will say you're exactly right. And the proof there is that, let's face it, I won't mention names, but there are plenty of bands that come out with that strong first record. They've had their whole lifetime to write their first record, and then when they're forced to start writing more material over the course of short periods of time, 6 to 8 months, they just can't do it. I mean, they just can't write the quality songs. And for Eddie to be able to be the guy who could write these riffs, I mean, we could go through Unchained, Hear About It Later, Panama. We can go through all those riffs, and to be able to write the songs, with Roth to partner together to write those songs. I mean, it's kind of, and the solos. I mean, come on, it's sort of, that's when people will say, oh, Eddie Van Halen's overrated. I'm like, in what world is he overrated? He could solo, he could write these songs, he wrote the riffs. I mean, he had everything. I mean, it was like you're saying, it was just an unbelievable period of creativity. And so again, it's funny. There was that picture that just went up on Twitter that Eddie Van Halen's Twitter account. I'm sure Eddie's wife took the picture and posted it of them on the beach or something. And,
Yeah, I've seen that.
It was somebody posted something semi-rude saying like, get in the studio and get back to work. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what, the guy, I know the guy was joking, but the guy, Eddie Van Halen, has given us all so much great music over the years. And, like, you know what, if he wants to sit in the beach every day and just watch the sunset, God bless him, because it's the amount of creativity and the world-changing Eddie Van Halen / Van Halen effect, that's going to live on well long after we're both dead.
Oh, absolutely, and I could go on and on about Eddie because I mean, it just goes without saying. But I want to talk a little bit about Roth too. I'm really happy to see Roth back in the band. I'm hoping that they're in the studio doing something. I've seen pictures that came out not too long ago. Wolf Gang Van Halen posts things every once in a while, and you just don't know what you're looking at sometimes, and it especially when you see pictures of them in the studio, and you wonder, well, what are they doing in there right now? So I'm glad to see that.
It's, your guess is good as mine. I'll tell you the one thing, I don't have any inside information. I don't have any great contacts in the Van Halen camp. But I will say the one thing that is sort of gives me optimism as a fan, kind of watching what's going on, is the fact that Wolfie's solo record hasn't come out yet, and he's been working on it for a couple of years. And you got to figure at this point, I mean, it's got to be. He could finish it if he wanted to, I'm sure. And so to me, that gives me some hope that maybe there'll be a Van Halen tour with Wolfie doing double duty, Michael Anthony back. Again, this is all just me speculating, but that, in other words, for next year for the 40th anniversary of Van Halen's debut record. So that's the thing that's giving me a little bit of hope that might happen, is because I would think, his record was supposed to come out a year ago, I thought. So the fact that it's not out makes me think maybe that's the silver lining for us, the gold at the end of the rainbow, so to speak.
Yeah, Wolf is awesome, and I love that he's so engaged with social media because the rest of the guys are not. So it helps to have Wolfie
Yeah.
posting things.
No, it's definitely it's so fun. It's interesting too. It's like yeah, it's like yeah, but they've that's kind of been the Van Halen approach for the last 20 years is no news is good news, so to speak. They haven't broken up, so so assume everything's fine.
Right on. And speaking of Roth, I've got a photograph up now of Roth surrounded by pretty young girls at the Whiskey A Go Go, and I'm kind of going backwards a little bit. But Roth is such an important factor with everything that he was doing. This whole boogity boogie
Right.
boo, this the Roth thing. I mean, he's
Right.
very unique. And do you touch on David Lee Roth in your book in detail?
Oh yeah. So this is something I'm thinking. If you guys are listening or David Lee Roth fans, or just want to know kind of how Dave became Dave, one of the things I did with the book is that I talk in a whole chapter about Dave's first band, which was called Red Ball Jet, and so there's this whole series of episodes that circulate around Roth's high school bands. This is before he joins Van Halen, where I won't spoil some of the stories from the book, but basically, if you read the book, you'll get to see what Dave looked like in '73, what kind of music he was trying to play with this band, which was basically like, kind of like Stones, Chuck Berry. These were high school kids, right? And they were not particularly sophisticated musicians, but all the Dave Roth entertainment aspects of things that would come later, the dressing, the dancing, all that stuff Dave was trying to work out in this band Red Ball Jet. And so I always say to people, watch the Hot for Teacher video and then think about the band Red Ball Jet, which, in the big scheme of things is a non-factor in the musical history, except that it shows Dave Roth's vision for what he wanted rock to be, which would be entertaining, danceable, along with powerful. That was all sort of there, and Dave had that sense of what he wanted his musical groups to be like. And so to me, that's really telling as we get into the Van Halen marriage between Dave and Eddie and Alex. You start to see how those two different visions, because Eddie and Alex were much more low key in what they thought should happen on stage. I mean, if we all sort of know a little bit about Alex Van Halen. It seems like he's a pretty serious guy. He was not a guy who was going to want to, to dance, basically, if he wasn't behind the drums. And so to have someone out there like Dave who could really grab the spotlight, grab the attention of the girls, it all sort of worked well together for those guys.
Yeah, he did. I have a fiance who's I'm 46, and I kind of live like a rock star in one aspect. My fiance is beautiful, and she just turned 23 years old yesterday. So considerably older, but she's very mature, and but she's really beautiful. So I kind of feel like I have a little bit of David Lee Roth going here, but
God bless you, brother. Right? You're living the dream.
I'm living the dream. So, but anyway, I said, hey, she's young. She never doesn't know anything about Van Halen. So, I said, hey, I want you to watch this video, and I played an old video, and I believe it was. You probably know what this video. It was shot, I believe, overseas, and they're on a very small stage, and Eddie Van Halen's dressed up in his red, white, striped kind of outfit with the
Yeah.
knickers or whatever,
Uh-huh.
and Roth is just gyrating around, got his shirt off, and I had her watch the video, and yeah, she, mouth open like what? I mean, she was really surprised to see David Lee Roth doing his thing.
It's so funny that you say that, because I think that's the reaction a lot of people had. The Van Halen brothers, when they had their high school band before they made Van Halen, was called Mammoth. Imagine it was basically Eddie and Alex minus Dave, and it was just a very much a low key. Eddie used to wear jeans. There's pictures of this in the book. Eddie used to wear jeans and flannel shirts, and so there was no spandex, there was no racy outfits, there was no jumping around, it wasn't coming off the drum riser and doing splits or any of that stuff. And so they pair up with this guy Dave, who's all about moving and swinging around on stage and shaking his ass. It's different. It's yeah. So your girlfriend's or your fiance's reaction is exactly right. Like, when Dave first joined Van Halen, I talk about this in the book, people had that same reaction, like what is this? What are these guys doing? One of Eddie's friends from high school, who's a musician himself, told me, a couple of us went up to Eddie and asked him, why did you destroy your group? Basically, like, why did you ruin your group? We loved your group before. Now you got this joker in the group. But, Eddie and Alex were onto something. They knew what they needed, and they were 100,000%, despite all their frustrations later with Roth, 100,000% right about Dave Roth was the guy who could help them get out of California, get out of Pasadena, and get to be stars.
And he did. They did they did it together, but definitely Roth is a piece of a puzzle that just you got to have it, you know. And I love these guys. They're incredible. And I do want to kind of jump back in time just a little bit. I know we kind of covered a lot, but I want to go back to the Whiskey a Go Go days because that's always been fascinating to me. Um, Whiskey a Go Go, Sunset Strip, right?
Yeah.
And these guys were hanging out there doing their thing in the late '70s, right?
Yeah, so they were basically playing the whiskey from about December of 76 to December of 77. So they go out on the road with Journey and Montrose in March of 78. So they basically spend 1 year, the last year they're in LA. That's kind of their premier place they play is the whiskey.
Mhm. And I'm looking at a picture right now, and they're at the whiskey on this small stage. I mean, it's
Hmm.
cramped. It's little. It's cramped
Yep.
with all of their gear and everything. I mean, they've got it filled up. The crowd is ecstatic, and they've got four very scantily clad women standing on. I mean, okay, I just put it. They're wearing panties, bras, and I mean, they're almost naked. And then they've got this one fat guy standing next. I mean, that must have been
In a diaper.
in a
In a diaper.
yeah, in a toga or something.
That
But
was so that was yeah that was
is that
I know that
Roth?
picture. That picture is taken New Year's Eve, 1977. So that's actually their last show at the Whiskey. They they're rehearsing or whatever they're doing before they go out on the road with Montrose and Journey. And so yeah, that was their goodbye to Los Angeles as a club band. But yeah, that's a funny. I mean, that's Roth, right? That's the Roth. I'm sure like, oh yeah, let's get this fat guy in a diaper out there and stage. It's Baby New Year or whatever they called him, and they bring him out there and so that's the to me, that's all the fun of what Van Halen was. It was like a giant party paired with this great music and great songs. And so, yeah, and the whiskey is a relatively small club. It only holds about 300 people, and so also had the benefit for those guys to be sort of the highest platform club in L.A. It's a place that ZZ Top and Led Zeppelin had played there, the Doors. I mean, you go down the line, every big group that ever we can think of had played at the Whiskey, and so for Van Halen to be able to play there at that time was a big deal for them, even though they weren't nationally famous.
Right on. And I've got a picture here of Eddie playing his black and white guitar. Roth, of course, is standing next to him. They're on the Whiskey a Go Go stage, and he's got this. I guess that's his Variac, the airplane bomb looking contraption that he made. I don't. Again, that's a gearhead stuff. So, but yeah, fascinating. Picture. I mean, Eddie's got his mouth open, like how he does that open mouth thing all the time. Like he's screaming the guitar through his mouth.
The Yeah, the whole Eddie Van Halen thing. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, that's what people. I mentioned before we went on the air. I was mentioning about a friend of mine, a guitarist named Tracy G, who had played with Ronnie Dio, and Tracy. I interviewed him for the book extensively, and Tracy had the good fortune of being in LA at this time as a teenager and got to see Van Halen at the Whiskey and the Starwood and everywhere. And he said he'd go to every Van Halen concert he could as a young kid. But he said that Eddie had it all. He had the look, he moved great on stage, he had the sound, the songs. He said it was just the amazing. Before they were famous, he said, this guy's got it all. I mean, he's got everything. And so yeah, it's just the whole Eddie Van Halen vibe.
I love it. I love that. What they did was they made that metal or hard rock music. It was danceable and fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things too that want to make sure people understand, and when they're reading the book, and hopefully they'll get it from reading it, is that whatever Eddie and Alex had as the starting point for their musicianship, was Deep Purple, Black Sabbath. It was a much more downbeat, much more minor keyed, much more dark, like more like at the time. Again, it wouldn't have been called heavy metal. We wouldn't call it heavy metal now necessarily. Maybe Sabbath, but not Deep Purple. That was what heavy metal was. And so when Roth kind of comes into the picture, they end up with this musical pairing that becomes sort of like the Beach Boys, against the heavy metal sound, where you have the backing vocals with Michael Anthony, those harmonies with Roth's vocals. It's this, like you said, it's pop metal. That's what I call it in the book. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's pop, hard rock, pop metal that gave you the solos of a Richie Blackmore basically paired with Beach Boy harmonies.
Yeah, and I just personally too, I think they had that sort of Beatle thing going. I mean,
Yes.
it's and that was huge. I mean, to have that type of thing going is that's oh my God. And I remember the U.S. festival in '83 as a kid being aired on television, and watching these guys. I'm just like, what? I mean, oh my God, so much fun. Eddie is so much fun to watch. David Lee Roth is absolutely fun to watch, and Michael Anthony, of course, him and his whiskey bass, and just the whole persona, and Alex, the tough guy drummer back there, just holding that beat down, and yeah, they had that Beatle thing going too. So I really appreciate what they did. It really inspired me in my life, and it really gave me a lot of enjoyment, and has given me a lot of enjoyment through all these years. And speaking of enjoyment, I know I'm going to enjoy your book. I can't wait to get it. I know everyone else will enjoy your book, and I just encourage everyone to, and this is a shameless plug, but I encourage everyone to go to Amazon.com, check out Greg Renoff's page on there, follow him on Amazon, check out, get his book. You won't regret it. It's a gem. And hey, if you're a history buff, there's another book there too. Big
I try
Big
not to
Tent.
plug that book too much because I don't want people like giving it 1 star, being like, I read the Van Halen book, I loved it. This other book, it's like this book's terrible because it's a different type of book. That's nice of you to say that, but yeah,
Right.
and I'm on Twitter at Greg Renoff, so at GREGRENOFF, Facebook /Van Halen Rising, all pushed together like that. And sure, I'd love to connect with people. I have a lot of fun with on Twitter. We rehash Van Halen 3 on a regular basis and all the other ups and downs of Van Halen history from the top to the bottom. And so it's fun, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk to you, Gary, and wish you all the luck with American-made guitars.
Thank you, Greg. There was so much more we could have talked about, but we could talk for hours and hours and hours. And I think we've got enough just here for people to understand what it is that you've done, and the encouragement's there, so the motivation's there. Thank you very much for being on the show, and I wish you the best with your book. And I look forward to your next book, whatever it is.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you, Greg, for joining US American Made Guitars.com. This is Gary Housley. Till next time, keep it rocking.